Oh, we're going to cover a scary, scary topic today. For us guitarists out there, we're going to be covering the topic of MIDI. Bum, bum, bum.
And how to use it with the NUX Amp Academy. Well, this is the first in a two-part series on how to use MIDI with the NUX Amp Academy. Now, if you're asking yourself a question, what's MIDI? Well, MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It's a binary language that's been around since the early 80s and has been used on so many synthesizers, drum machines, lighting rigs, whatever. I could just go on and on and on for a MIDI. But MIDI is one of those essentials when you're in the technology side of how we do what we do, either in the studio or on the stage. And in this case here, MIDI enables us to turn off and on the amps, select different scenes, turn off and on the pedal itself, access a lot of the various parameters that the Amp Academy can execute upon. But for now, let's start with talking about the components that you actually need in order to make all of this work. Okay, I have set up a very simple to understand MIDI setup here on my pedal board so that we can control the Amp Academy with the MIDI foot switch down here at the bottom. Now, one thing to note is that the Amp Academy does not have the traditional MIDI ports that you'll find like on the back of a synthesizer or a drum machine. In this case, all of the MIDI is sent and received by the USB-C port. So in order to connect this up and use this in a MIDI situation like what we're going to do here, you need to use a USB MIDI host. And so this Door MIDI USB MIDI host is a great solution. As a side note, if you're going to do MIDI with, say, one of our other products like the MG300 or the MG30, this is still going to be something you're going to want to get. So it's a good investment. It doesn't cost that much really. But what it does essentially is it converts MIDI information into USB, which then goes to the USB-C port in the back so that this can send and receive MIDI without any problems at all. Next is the foot switch. Now, in this case, I'm using an Ampero control. We don't make a MIDI foot switch at this time, so this is a good substitute. It gives us 4 foot switches to work with, and we can assign them any way we want to, and we're going to cover that in a second. But this is very straightforward. MIDI out to MIDI in. So MIDI out, MIDI in, USB host to the Amp Academy, and that is it. That's all you need. Before moving on to the next part of this video, I want you to take just a quick moment here. I want you to listen to some advice. Bring it in, bring it in, bring it in. Okay? Listen carefully. Are you listening?
Keep it simple.
Okay, and I'm saying this so that you understand. MIDI can be as complex as you want it to be. It can be as simple as you want it to be. It's all up to you. There are so many things you do with MIDI. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. And that's my point. If you're new to MIDI, please, please, please understand this is like picking up a new instrument. So remember all the way back then in the beginning when you started playing guitar, you didn't pick up that guitar and start sounding like Eddie Van Halen right off the bat, did you? Of course not. You had to practice to get there, and it's the same thing here with MIDI. So just keep it simple, and I promise you, you will see the results you're looking for. Let's move on to the next part. In this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to set up the 4 foot switches on the Ampero control to access the various scenes of the Amp Academy. Let's get to it. Okay, so things look a little different now, don't they? Because we have the pedal board here, but we've also got this groovy app called the Ampero Control app. And I have already done a whole video on how to use the Ampero Control, and I'll leave a link in the video description so you can check it out for yourself. All right, so we need to program what are called controller changes. And each parameter of the Amp Academy has its own address, has a controller address and a range assigned to it. So in order to access that list and understand where those addresses are and what the ranges are, you need to refer to the list that is available in the Amp Academy app. So if you plug it into your computer and you go into the settings, you'll be able to access the entire list of MIDI addresses. Of course, you can also go to our Facebook group, and our Facebook group, somebody's already posted a list of all of the MIDI destinations there so that you know exactly where to go. In this case here, we're going to be going to controller change 40. And controller change 40 accesses the scenes. So we can go from scene 1 to scene 2 to scene 3, and we can jump back and forth as much as we want. We're also going to set up the 4th foot switch here to act as a bypass switch for the Amp Academy too. So in order to do this, let's understand first what needs to be programmed. Each one of these foot switches needs to be programmed to send a specific, all three of these are going to be set to controller change 40. And there's going to be 3 values. Sorry, I almost did 0, but it's 3 values. And one of them is going to be 0, then 1, and then 2. Now, when it comes to MIDI, when it comes to the range of messages, 0 counts. Just keep that in mind because there are 128 parameters and it's 0 to 127. So that means that 0 does count in this case. Remember, it's binary. Okay, so we are going to go to our first controller here so it can toggle between all of the controllers here. It's easy, it's easy. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to footswitch 1 and we're gonna set up 40 as our first controller. Okay, we're gonna click on done. And I'm going to save this as we move along and show you what I mean. So I've saved it. Now I'm gonna jump over to scene 2 here on the Amp Academy. And now I'm gonna use the first foot switch here on the Ampere control. And there you go. I was able to jump back to scene 1 right from here. So now you're beginning to see it, right? So I'm gonna go to the next one here, which is 40. And it has a data destination of 1 in this case. Remember, it's 0, 1, and 2. That's the range. So it's address 40, controller change 40, 0, 1, and 2. Those are the 3 that you need to work with. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and move to the next one here and set this up. Okay, so now I have scene 1, I have scene 2, and I have scene 3. I can even name them if I want to. Like I could go in here and say scene 3, and I can name this one scene 2, and I can name this one scene 1. Make sure you save. So now, if I use the foot switch, there you go, scene 2, scene 3. So I can jump back to scene 1. I can jump all the way over to scene 3 if I want to. I can jump back to scene 2. It doesn't matter. You've got all of that versatility because when you're working here on the scene foot switch on the Amp Academy itself, it's all linear, meaning you have to go scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and then back to scene 1. Or you can disengage scene 3 altogether and just go from scene 1 to 2. But who wants to do that? Why can't I have all 3 scenes available to me at once? Well, it's easy. Scene 1, scene 3, scene 2, scene 1. And you can see that as I'm making those changes, I'm hitting those foot switches, you can see that the little LED here on the USB MIDI host is flashing to let you know that MIDI data is being transmitted from the Ampere control to the USB MIDI host and then to the Amp Academy. Okay, so the final controller that we're going to change here is we're going to set up a bypass foot switch on we're going to buy a bypass switch on the 4th foot switch here of the Ampere control. And to do this, we need to change from single to toggle. You can do singles, toggles, momentary switches, holds. Again, you really do need to know the difference between all of these. And what we have is destination is 46, I believe, and the let's see, the range is 0 and 1. So I'm just going to set it to address of 46, value of 1. That's going to be for the first group. The second group, which is when you press it again, that's going to be set to 46 and 0. And that should be it. So let's save this. And then if everything's correct, I should be able to bypass it. There it is. I bypassed it, and now I brought it back on. I bypassed it, and then I brought it back on. All of that was done in just a matter of minutes. So try to now imagine what you can do when you really start exploring all of the options of MIDI with the Amp Academy. And we'll cover a lot of that in the next video of this series. Well, that concludes this first part of a 2-part series on how to use MIDI with the NUX Amp Academy. Be sure to come back for part 2 somewhere down the road. We'll see you then.